They underestimated humanity until battle-tested troops struck in return. Part 1. First contact gone wrong. The Velthari had conquered 40 species across 3 galaxies. They were tall creatures with gray skin and 4 arms. Their eyes glowed a soft blue, and their voices sounded like grinding metal. For 10,000 years, they had ruled the stars without challenge. Every species they met either surrendered or died. There was no third option. Commander Zorath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion. He watched Earth grow larger on his viewing screen. It was a small planet, mostly covered in water. The dominant species called themselves humans. They had only discovered how to travel between stars 50 years ago. Their ships were slow. Their weapons were weak. Zorath had studied their history and found it amusing. These creatures spent most of their existence fighting each other over land, resources, and ideas. They were violent and primitive. This would be an easy conquest. Zorath sent his message to Earth. He gave them 72 hours to surrender. If they refused, he would destroy their cities one by one until nothing remained. He expected fear. He expected panic. He expected leaders begging for mercy. Captain Daniel Carter received the message aboard the carrier Valor's Edge. He was 45 years old, with gray hair at his temples and scars on his hands from decades of military service. He had fought in 3 wars on distant colonies. He had trained soldiers, led them into battle, and buried too many of them. When he read the alien ultimatum, he felt something cold settle in his chest. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Morgan stood beside him. She was younger, with sharp eyes and a quick mind. She had risen through the ranks faster than anyone Carter had ever seen. She was brilliant at tactics, and even better at staying calm when everything fell apart. "What do we do?" she asked. Carter looked at the message again. Surrender or die. Those were the only choices the Velthari offered. "We fight," he said. The next 72 hours were chaos. Earth's leaders argued and debated. Some wanted to surrender. They said humanity could not win against such advanced technology. Others wanted to negotiate. Perhaps they could offer something the Velthari wanted. But the military knew the truth. The Velthari did not want to negotiate. They wanted slaves and resources. Surrender meant the end of everything humanity had built. When the 72 hours ended, Earth sent no response. Commander Zorath was surprised. Every other species had surrendered by now. He shrugged his 4 shoulders and gave the order to attack. The first wave hit the coastal cities. Beams of blue light fell from the sky and turned buildings into ash. New York, London, Tokyo, Mumbai. Millions died in the first hour. The screams could be heard from space. Zorath watched the destruction with satisfaction. This would break them. This always broke them. But something strange happened. The humans did not surrender. Instead, they fought back. Earth's defense fleet was small compared to the Velthari Armada. They had 50 warships against 300. Captain Carter led the counterattack from the Valor's Edge. He knew they could not win, but that was not the point. The point was to hurt the enemy. The point was to make them bleed. The battle was brutal. Human ships exploded like fireworks against the darkness of space. Pilots flew their damaged vessels directly into Velthari cruisers. Gunners kept firing, even as their ships burned around them. For every human ship destroyed, they took 1 Velthari ship with them. Zorath watched with growing unease. These humans were not afraid to die. They did not retreat. They did not beg. They just kept fighting. When the space battle ended, humanity had lost 60% of its fleet. But the Velthari had lost nearly a quarter of theirs. It was the worst single engagement in Dominion history. Zorath decided to change tactics. He would land ground forces and crush the humans directly. His soldiers were stronger and better equipped. They would pacify this planet within weeks. The landing ships descended on North America, Europe, and Asia. Valkyrie soldiers marched through the ruins of human cities. They expected broken survivors hiding in the rubble. They expected easy targets. Sergeant Major Kevin Brooks was waiting for them. Brooks was 50 years old and built like a tank. He had spent 30 years in the military, fighting on Mars and in the asteroid belt. He had killed pirates, insurgents, and anyone else who threatened human colonies. When the aliens landed, he gathered every soldier he could find and prepared to welcome them. The first Valkyrie patrol entered what remained of Chicago. They moved through the empty streets with confidence. Their armor could stop any human bullet. Their weapons could kill from a mile away. They had nothing to fear from these primitive creatures. The explosion came without warning. The entire street erupted in fire. Half the patrol died instantly. The survivors tried to form a defensive position, but bullets came from every direction. They could not see their attackers. They could only hear the crack of rifles and the screams of their dying comrades. Brooks watched from a shattered window 3 blocks away. He had set up the ambush perfectly. The aliens were strong, but they were arrogant. They did not expect resistance. They did not know how to fight an enemy they could not see. When the last Valkyrie soldier fell, Brooks gave the signal to move. His team vanished into the ruins before reinforcements arrived. Across the planet, similar scenes played out. In the mountains of Switzerland, in the jungles of Vietnam, in the deserts of Africa. Humans did not fight like other species. They did not stand in neat lines and wait to be killed. They hid. They ambushed. They struck from shadows and disappeared before the enemy could respond. Commander Zorath received the reports with growing anger. His soldiers were dying every day. The humans refused to surrender. They refused to even negotiate. They just kept fighting, killing his troops one by one. He had conquered 40 species. None of them had resisted like this. None of them had this fire in their blood. For the first time in his long career, Zorath felt something he had never felt before. He felt doubt. On Earth, Captain Carter received word of the ground resistance. He was hiding with the surviving fleet in an asteroid base at the edge of the solar system. The news gave him hope. Humanity was not beaten. They were just getting started. He looked at Lisa Morgan and allowed himself a small smile. "They think they are the predators," he said. "They do not understand. We have been at war for 10,000 years. We have fought ourselves over and over until we became the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy." Morgan nodded. "And now they get to find out." Carter turned back to his planning screens. The war was just beginning, and humanity would not lose. They underestimated humanity until battle-tested troops struck in Return Part 2. The guerrilla war begins. 3 months had passed since the invasion began. The Valkyrie controlled the skies and the major cities. Their ships patrolled the atmosphere day and night. Their soldiers walked through the streets of every capital on Earth. On paper, they had won, but paper meant nothing in this war. Master Sergeant Samantha Reyes crouched in the darkness of a mountain cave. She was 38 years old, with brown hair tied back in a tight braid. Her face was covered in dirt and dried blood. She had not slept in 2 days, but her eyes were sharp and focused. Around her sat 40 soldiers, all that remained of her original company. They had been stationed at a base in Colorado when the invasion began. The Valkyrie destroyed the base from orbit, killing hundreds in seconds. Samantha survived because she had been leading a training exercise in the mountains. She gathered the survivors and retreated into the wilderness. Now they were ghosts. They lived in caves and abandoned mines. They ate what they could hunt and scavenge. They had limited ammunition and no support from command. But they had something more important. They had experience. Samantha had served 3 tours in conflict zones before the invasion. She knew how to fight a stronger enemy. She knew how to make them afraid. "Tonight we hit their supply convoy," she told her soldiers. "Intel says they are moving weapons through the old highway. 12 vehicles. 60 soldiers." A young private named Tommy Grant raised his hand. He was barely 20 years old, with a face that still looked like a boy. "Sergeant, we only have 40 fighters. And they have armor we cannot pierce." Samantha smiled. It was not a kind smile. "We do not need to pierce their armor. We just need to make them crash." The ambush happened at midnight. Samantha had spent 2 days preparing the site. Her team buried explosives under the road at 3 different points. They positioned snipers on the ridges above. They set up escape routes through the forest. The Valkyrie convoy appeared right on schedule. 12 heavy vehicles moved slowly through the mountain pass. The alien soldiers inside felt safe. Their armor was strong. Their weapons were powerful. What could the humans possibly do? The first explosion flipped the lead vehicle into the air. It crashed onto its roof and burst into flames. The second explosion destroyed the rear vehicle, trapping the convoy in the kill zone. The third explosion hit the middle of the line, scattering wreckage across the road. Before the Valkyrie could react, sniper fire began. Samantha had taught her people well. They aimed for the neck joints where the armor was weakest. They aimed for the eyes. They aimed for anything exposed. The aliens poured out of their vehicles and tried to form defensive positions. But they could not see their attackers. The humans were hidden in the darkness, using night vision equipment salvaged from military bases. Every time a Valkyrie soldier moved, a bullet found them. The battle lasted 12 minutes. When it ended, all 60 Valkyrie soldiers were dead. Samantha lost 3 of her own people. She ordered her team to strip the convoy of everything useful: weapons, ammunition, food, medical supplies. They worked quickly and efficiently, loading their packs before reinforcements could arrive. By the time Valkyrie aircraft reached the site, Samantha and her soldiers had vanished into the mountains. Commander Zorth received the report with cold fury. This was the 4th convoy destroyed this month. His soldiers were dying every day to enemies they could not find. The humans struck from nowhere and disappeared before his forces could respond. He demanded answers from his officers. How could primitive creatures cause so much damage? His generals had no answers. They had never faced an enemy like this. Every other species they conquered had fought in open battle. The humans refused to play by those rules. Across the ocean, another resistance was growing. Captain Marcus Hall had organized fighters in the Scottish Highlands. He was 42 years old, a former special operations soldier with skills that made him perfect for this war. He trained farmers, shopkeepers, and factory workers to become killers. His methods were different from Samantha's, but equally effective. He focused on information warfare. His people infiltrated Valkyrie camps as servants and laborers. They learned the aliens' language. They mapped their command structure. They reported everything back to Marcus. One night, Marcus led a team of 12 fighters into a Valkyrie communication center. They killed the guards silently with knives and wire. They planted explosives on the main antenna. When the building exploded, the Valkyrie lost all communication with their ships in orbit for 6 hours. In that time, the surviving human fleet struck. Admiral Christine Webb had been hiding with her ships in an asteroid base near Jupiter. She was 60 years old with white hair and a face like carved stone. She had lost her husband and 2 sons in the initial attack. She had nothing left but revenge. When the Valkyrie communications went dark, she saw her opportunity. Her fleet, now numbering only 30 ships, attacked a supply station orbiting Mars. The Valkyrie defenders were confused and disorganized, without guidance from their commanders. The human ships tore through them like wolves through sheep. "Lieutenant," Anthony Russo was aboard the cruiser Iron Will during the battle. He was 26 years old, an engineer who had never expected to see combat. But the war had changed everyone. He manned a repair station, keeping the ship's systems running while battles raged around him. During the fight, a Valkyrie missile damaged the Iron Will's main weapon system. The captain ordered Anthony to fix it. He crawled through burning corridors, choking on smoke, and reached the damaged section. The weapon's targeting computer was destroyed, but Anthony had an idea. He bypassed the computer and connected the weapon directly to the bridge controls. It was crude, but it worked. The Iron Will fired its repaired weapon and destroyed the last Valkyrie cruiser. The supply station fell soon after. Admiral Webb examined the captured technology with great interest. The Valkyrie had advanced shields that made their ships nearly invincible. But Anthony discovered something important. The shields operated on a specific frequency. If human weapons could be modified to match that frequency, they could punch through like the shields were not there, Dad. It would take time to retrofit the fleet. But now they had hope. On Earth, the resistance continued to grow. Word of Samantha's victory spread through underground networks. Survivors from destroyed cities made their way to the mountains. Soldiers who had been hiding emerged to fight. Within 6 months, her cell had grown from 40 fighters to over 300. The Valkyrie called her the Ghost of the Mountains. They offered rewards for her capture. They sent their best hunters to find her. They all failed. Samantha knew she could not win the war alone. But she could make the enemy pay for every inch of Earth they occupied. She could make them fear the darkness. She could make them understand that this planet would never be theirs. One night, she stood at the mouth of her cave and looked up at the stars. Somewhere out there, Admiral Webb was preparing a counterattack. Somewhere out there, humanity was building new weapons. Tommy Grant stood beside her. He was no longer a boy. 3 months of war had turned him into a hardened soldier. "Do you think we can win?" he asked. Samantha thought about all the people they had lost. All the cities burned. All the friends buried in unmarked graves. Then she thought about the Valkyrie soldiers who fell to her ambush. The convoys destroyed. The fear in the aliens' eyes when they realized they were being hunted. "Yes," she said, "because they have never fought anything like us. And they do not know how to stop what they cannot understand." The war continued, and humanity refused to break. They underestimated humanity until battle-tested troops struck in Return Part 3. The tide begins to turn 6 months into the occupation. Commander Zora stood in his command center and stared at the reports on his screen. The numbers made no sense. He had brought 300 ships and 500,000 soldiers to conquer Earth. He should have won in weeks. Instead, he had lost nearly 100 ships and over 50,000 soldiers. The humans were not defeated. They were more dangerous than ever. His officers stood behind him in silence. They had no explanations. They had no solutions. They had only fear. How? Zorath demanded. How do these primitive creatures continue to resist? No one answered. On Earth, the resistance had grown into something the Valkyrie could not contain. What started as scattered groups of survivors had become a coordinated army. They communicated through hidden radio networks. They shared weapons, supplies, and intelligence. They struck together across multiple continents at the same time. Samantha Reyes had become the symbol of this resistance. Her name was whispered in occupied cities like a prayer. Young people left their homes to join her. Veteran soldiers traveled hundreds of miles to fight under her command. She had started with 40 fighters. Now she led over 3,000, but she wanted more than survival. She wanted victory. Her scouts brought news of a Valkyrie general who had established a command center in the ruins of Denver. General Krath was responsible for the occupation of North America. He had ordered the destruction of 20 cities. He had killed millions. Samantha decided he would pay for those deaths. The mission was almost impossible. Denver was heavily defended. Thousands of Velthory soldiers patrolled the streets. Anti-aircraft weapons covered the sky. The command center itself was a fortress built inside what had once been a government building. Samantha asked for volunteers. She needed people who understood they might not come back. Over 100 raised their hands. She chose 12 of the best. Tommy Grant was among them. He had changed so much since the early days of the war. His boyish face was now hard and scarred. His hands were steady when he held a rifle. He did not hesitate to kill. "This is a one-way trip," Samantha told her team. "We get in, we kill the general, and we get out if we can. No rescue is coming. No backup. Just us." They nodded. They understood. The team infiltrated Denver through the old sewer system. They moved through darkness for 16 hours, crawling through tunnels filled with water and waste. Samantha had memorized the route from maps provided by resistance scouts. She led her people without error. They emerged inside the city after midnight. The streets were quiet. Velthory patrols moved in predictable patterns because they believed no human would dare enter Denver. Samantha proved them wrong. Her team moved like shadows. They avoided patrols and disabled security systems. They killed guards silently with knives and garrotes. By the time they reached the command center, no alarm had been raised. The building had once been beautiful. Now it was covered in alien technology. Strange lights pulsed along the walls. Foreign symbols marked every door. Samantha did not care about any of it. She only cared about one thing. General Kraft was meeting with his staff on the top floor. Samantha's team planted explosives on every support column they could reach. They set the timers for 10 minutes. Then they climbed. They met resistance on the 8th floor. A Velthory guard spotted Tommy and raised his weapon. Tommy was faster. He fired 3 rounds into the alien's neck joint. The guard fell with a sound like breaking glass, but the noise alerted others. Alarms began to wail. Velthory soldiers poured into the stairwell from above and below. Samantha's team was trapped. "Keep moving," Samantha shouted. "We do not have time." They fought their way up floor by floor. They lost people at every landing. By the time they reached the top floor, only 4 remained. Samantha, Tommy, a woman named Rachel, a man named Ben. The conference room doors were locked. Ben placed a charge on them and blew them open. Inside, General Kraft stood with 6 of his officers. They reached for their weapons. Samantha shot the general first. 3 rounds to the chest. The alien stumbled back against the window, blue blood pouring from his wounds. He looked at her with shock in his glowing eyes. "You cannot win," he said. His voice was weak. "The Dominion will send more fleets, more soldiers. You will all die." "Maybe," Samantha said. "But you will die first." She shot him again. He fell through the window and dropped 20 stories to the street below. The explosives detonated 30 seconds later. The building collapsed on itself, burying the general's staff and 100 Velthory soldiers in the rubble. Samantha and her remaining team barely escaped through a side exit before the whole structure came down. They ran through the chaos. Fires burned everywhere. Velthory soldiers shouted in confusion. No one knew what had happened or who was responsible. Samantha lost Rachel in the escape. Ben took a bullet to the leg and told them to leave him behind. He died holding off a Velthory patrol while Samantha and Tommy disappeared into the night. 2 days later, they reached the resistance camp in the mountains. Samantha had lost 8 of her 12 soldiers. But the mission was a success. General Kraft was dead. The Velthory command structure in North America was in chaos. News of the attack spread across the planet. Other resistance groups launched their own operations. In Europe, Captain Marcus Hall assassinated 2 Valkyrie commanders in a single week. In Asia, a group called the Shadow Tigers destroyed the main alien base in Beijing. The occupation was crumbling in space. Admiral Webb watched the reports with grim satisfaction. The ground war was going better than she had hoped. Now it was time to do her part. Lieutenant Anthony Russo had finished his work on the fleet. Every surviving ship was now equipped with weapons that could penetrate Valkyrie shields. The technology was crude but effective. They had tested it on captured alien vessels. The results were devastating. Admiral Webb called her captains together for a planning session. Captain Daniel Carter sat at the head of the table, his face tired but determined. He had not slept properly in months. None of them had. "We have an opportunity," Webb said. "The Valkyrie have committed almost their entire regional fleet to Earth. They did not expect such heavy losses. If we can destroy this fleet, they will need years to mount another invasion. We are still outnumbered," Carter pointed out. "Even with the new weapons, we only have 30 ships against their 200. "True," Webb agreed. "Which is why we are not going to fight them here. We are going to attack their homeworld." The room went silent. Carter stared at the Admiral like she had lost her mind. "Attack their homeworld?" He repeated. "With 30 ships?" "With 30 ships, 10,000 Marines, and every weapon we have," Webb said. "They think we are broken. They think we are hiding. They will not expect us to strike at their heart." Carter thought about it. The plan was insane. It was reckless. It was exactly what the Valkyrie would never anticipate. "When do we leave?" he asked. Webb smiled for the first time in months. "We start preparing today. In 2 weeks, we bring the war to them." On Earth, Samantha received word of the planned attack through encrypted channels. She gathered her fighters and told them what was coming. "The fleet is going to hit the Valkyrie where they live," she said. "We need to keep the pressure on here. Every soldier they send to fight us is one less soldier defending their homeworld." Her fighters raised their weapons and cheered. They have been surviving for months. Now they would help humanity win. The tide was turning, and the Valkyrie had no idea what was about to hit them. They underestimated humanity until battle-tested troops struck in return part. 4. Striking back, the human fleet left the solar system on a cold December morning. 30 warships moved through the darkness of space toward a destination no one had ever reached before. The Valkyrie homeworld. The heart of the Dominion. Captain Daniel Carter stood on the bridge of the Valor's Edge and watched the stars stream past. His crew was silent. They all knew this might be their last voyage. They all knew they might never see Earth again. But none of them asked to stay behind. Admiral Webb had divided the fleet into 3 groups. The first group, led by Carter, would engage the main Valkyrie fleet and draw them away from the homeworld. The second group, commanded by Captain Nicole Bradley, would slip past the battle and strike the orbital command station. The third group consisted of troop transports carrying 10,000 Marines. Sergeant Major Kevin Brooks led the Marine assault team. He sat in the cargo hold of a transport ship, surrounded by soldiers checking their weapons and gear. Brooks was the oldest man in the unit. He had been fighting since before most of these soldiers were born. Now he would lead them into the most important battle humanity had ever faced. A young soldier named Jake sat across from him. Jake was 22 years old, with nervous eyes and shaking hands. This was his first major combat operation. "Sergeant Major," Jake said quietly, "do you think we will make it?" Brooks looked at the young man. He could have lied. He could have offered false hope. But soldiers deserve the truth. "Some of us will," Brooks said. "Some of us will not. That is the nature of war. What matters is that we do our job. We take the command station, and we give humanity a chance to survive." Jake nodded slowly. His hands stopped shaking. He checked his rifle one more time. The journey took 3 weeks. 3 weeks of waiting. 3 weeks of preparing. 3 weeks of saying silent goodbyes to everyone they loved. When the fleet reached Valtteri space, the enemy was waiting for them. Commander Zorath had been recalled from Earth to defend the homeworld. He stood on the bridge of his new flagship and watched the human ships approach. 30 vessels against his 200. The humans were either brave or insane. Perhaps both. Destroy them, he ordered. The Valtteri fleet moved to engage. Their ships were larger, faster, and better armed. Their shields could stop any weapon humanity had ever built. Zorath expected this battle to last minutes. He was wrong. Captain Carter gave his first order. All ships, arm the new weapons. Fire at will. The human fleet opened fire. Blue beams lanced through space and struck the Valtteri shields. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the shields flickered and died. The weapons Anthony Russo had designed worked perfectly. The Valtteri shields were useless. Zorath watched 3 of his cruisers explode in the first volley. His confidence turned to shock. How is this possible? He demanded. Our shields are gone, his tactical officer reported. The human weapons have been modified. They penetrate our defenses. For the first time in his life, Zorath felt real fear. The battle became chaos. Human ships darted between the larger Valtteri vessels, firing constantly. Their smaller size made them harder to hit. Their crews fought with desperate courage. For every human ship destroyed, 3 Valtteri ships fell. Carter commanded from the center of the fighting. His ship took hit after hit, but his crew kept it flying. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Morgan coordinated targeting solutions from her station, finding weak points in enemy formations. The Valor's Edge destroyed 12 enemy vessels in the first hour. While the main fleet held the line, Captain Nicole Bradley led her strike force toward the planet. She was a quiet woman with steady hands and ice in her veins. She had served with Carter for 15 years. She trusted him to keep the enemy busy while she did her job. The orbital command station hung above the Valtteri homeworld like a metal moon. It was the nerve center of the Dominion. Every order, every communication, every strategic decision passed through this station. If it fell, the Valtteri war machine would collapse. Bradley's ships attacked from above, diving through the thin defensive line. Her weapons tore through the station's shields. Explosions blossomed across its surface. Defense guns tried to target her ships, but they were too fast, too unpredictable. Shields are down, her tactical officer reported. Landing zones are clear. Signal the transports, Bradley ordered. Begin the ground assault. The troop transports descended toward the station. Sergeant Major Brooks felt the ship shake as it entered the atmosphere. Through the small window beside him, he could see fires burning on the station's surface. He could see Valtteri ships exploding in space. He could see history being made. The transport touched down hard. The doors blew open. Brooks was the first one out. The station was a maze of metal corridors and alien technology. Brooks did not care about any of it. He cared about one thing: reaching the command center and taking it down. His Marines spread out behind him. They moved in practice formations, clearing rooms and corridors with brutal efficiency. Valtteri soldiers met them at every turn. The aliens were taller and stronger, but they were not prepared for this. They had never defended their own territory. They had always been the invaders. Now they learned what it felt like to be invaded. Brooks led his squad through a security checkpoint, killing 6 guards in seconds. Jake was right behind him, firing controlled bursts into anything that moved. The young soldier was no longer shaking. He was a weapon. They reached the command center after 2 hours of fighting. The doors were sealed with heavy locks. Brooks planted charges and blew them open. Inside, the Valtteri commanders were trying to coordinate the defense of their fleet. They turned as the doors exploded. They reached for weapons. They were not fast enough. Brooks and his Marines killed them all. The command center fell silent, except for the hum of computers and the crackle of flames. Command center secured. Brooks reported over his radio. Enemy leadership eliminated. In space, the effect was immediate. Valkyrie ships began to scatter as communication with their commanders was lost. Their coordinated defense collapsed into chaos. Human ships picked them off one by one. Commander Zoroth watched his fleet crumble and knew he had lost. But he would not surrender. He would not give these humans this satisfaction. He ordered his flagship to target the Valor's Edge. If he was going to die, he would take the human commander with him. The Eternal Dominion fired everything it had. Missiles and energy beams raced toward Carter's ship. The Valor's Edge tried to evade, but the damage was too severe. Explosions tore through the hull. Fire spread through every deck. Carter knew his ship was dying. He looked at Lisa Morgan. She was bleeding from a cut on her forehead, but her eyes were clear. "Get to the escape pods," he ordered her. "Now, Captain." "That is an order, Commander." She hesitated for only a moment. Then she saluted and ran. Carter turned the Valor's Edge toward the Eternal Dominion. His ship was broken, but it still had engines. It still had momentum. It still had one last weapon. The ship itself. "All hands, abandon ship," Carter announced over the intercom. His voice was calm. "It has been an honor serving with you." The escape pods launched. Carter watched them go. Then he pushed the engines to maximum and aimed his dying ship at the enemy flagship. Zoroth saw what was happening too late. He tried to turn, tried to evade, but the Valor's Edge was too close. The two ships collided in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Both vessels were destroyed instantly. Carter and Zoroth died together, enemies to the last breath. Lisa Morgan watched from her escape pod. Tears ran down her face, but she did not look away. She watched until there was nothing left but wreckage and silence. Around her, the battle was ending. The Valkyrie fleet was broken. The command station had fallen. The invasion of Earth was over. Humanity had struck back, and the galaxy would never be the same. They underestimated humanity until battle-tested troops struck in Return Part 5, The Price of Victory, the Big Fang. Battle for the Valkyrie homeworld lasted 72 hours. It was the same amount of time they had given humanity to surrender. The universe had a cruel sense of poetry. When the last Valkyrie warship fell, Admiral Christine Webb stood on the bridge of her flagship and allowed herself to breathe. They had done it. Against impossible odds, against an enemy that had conquered 40 species. Humanity had won, but victory came at a terrible price. Captain Daniel Carter was dead. His sacrifice had destroyed the enemy commander and broken the Valkyrie fleet. Without his courage, the battle would have been lost. Webb would remember him for the rest of her life. She ordered the fleet to secure the orbital station and prepare for the next phase. The war was not over. The Valkyrie dominion stretched across 3 galaxies. Other fleets would come. Other commanders would seek revenge. But first, they needed to deal with what remained here. Sergeant Major Kevin Brooks walked through the corridors of the captured command station. His uniform was torn and stained with blood, both human and alien. He had lost 60 Marines in the assault. 60 young soldiers who would never go home. He carried their names in his heart like stones. Jake walked beside him. The young man who had been so nervous before the battle was now quiet and empty. He had killed more enemies than he could count. He had watched friends die in his arms. War had taken something from him that he would never get back. What happens now? Jake asked. Brooks looked out a window at the burning planet below. The Valkyrie homeworld was in chaos. News of the fleet's destruction had spread across their empire. Subject species who had been conquered generations ago were rising up. The Dominion was collapsing. "Now we go home," Brooks said. "We rebuild. We get ready for whatever comes next." "And the Valkyrie?" Brooks thought about the question. He had spent his entire life fighting. He had killed more enemies than he could remember. But he was tired of war. He was tired of death. He hoped humanity could find another way. "That depends on them," he said. "If they want peace, we will give them peace. If they want war, we will give them that too. Either way, they will never underestimate us again." On Earth, the occupation ended not with a bang but with a whisper. When the Valkyrie soldiers learned that their homeworld had fallen and their commanders were dead, they simply stopped fighting. They gathered in their bases and waited for orders that never came. Samantha Reyes led her fighters down from the mountains for the first time in months. They entered the ruins of Denver, where General Krath had died, and found Valkyrie soldiers sitting in the streets with their weapons on the ground. The aliens looked up at her with something she had never seen in their eyes before: fear and respect. "The war is over," she told them. "Surrender, and you will be treated fairly. Fight, and you will die." They surrendered. Every Valkyrie soldier on Earth surrendered. They had conquered 40 species, but they had never faced anything like humanity. They had no desire to continue this fight. The cleanup took months. Cities had to be rebuilt. Bodies had to be buried. Survivors had to be found and cared for. The scars of the invasion would take generations to heal, but humanity endured. They always did. Admiral Webb became the first commander of the United Earth Expeditionary Force. Her mission was to protect humanity and its new allies from any future threats. She built a fleet larger and more powerful than anything Earth had ever seen. She trained crews who understood that the universe was a dangerous place and that peace had to be defended. Lieutenant Anthony Russo was promoted to chief engineer of the fleet. His work on reverse engineering Valkyrie technology advanced human science by centuries. Within 5 years, humanity had ships that could cross galaxies in weeks instead of months. They had weapons that could destroy planets. They had shields that could stop anything. But Russo never forgot that technology without wisdom was dangerous. He taught his students that the goal was not to become like the Valkyrie. The goal was to be better. Lisa Morgan took command of the rebuilt Valor's Edge, named in honor of the original ship and its captain. She spent her career exploring the galaxy and making contact with species the Valkyrie had conquered. Many of them were afraid of humans at first. They had heard stories of what humanity had done to the Dominion. They expected conquerors. Instead, they found allies. Morgan offered friendship, trade, and protection. She never demanded submission. She never threatened destruction. She simply showed them that there was another way. Samantha Reyes retired from combat after the war. She had spent too long fighting and had lost too many people. She returned to the mountains of Colorado and established a training academy for future soldiers. Her students learned everything she knew about guerrilla warfare, survival, and leadership. But she also taught them something else. She taught them that the goal of war was not victory. The goal of war was peace. The best soldiers were the ones who fought so that others would not have to. Tommy Grant became one of her instructors. The young man who had started the war as a nervous private was now a hardened veteran. He taught close combat and urban warfare. His students both feared and respected him, but he also told them stories. Stories of the soldiers who did not come home. Stories of the sacrifices that made their freedom possible. He wanted them to understand that war was not glory. War was blood and death and loss. It was something to be avoided whenever possible and ended as quickly as possible. When it could not be avoided, Kevin Brooks retired to a small farm in Montana. He raised horses and spent his days in quiet solitude. He rarely talked about the war. When people asked him about the invasion, about the assault on the Velthari homeworld, about the day humanity fought back, he would simply shake his head. "We did what we had to do," he would say. Nothing more. But sometimes, late at night, he would stand on his porch and look up at the stars. He would think about the soldiers he had led, the ones who died so that others could live, the ones whose names no one remembered except him. He would salute the darkness and whisper their names one by one. Then he would go inside and sleep, knowing that he had done his duty. 10 years after the war ended, a memorial was built in the center of what had once been Denver. It was a simple structure, a wall of black stone with names carved into its surface. The names of everyone who had died fighting the Velthari. The names of soldiers and civilians, heroes and ordinary people who had refused to surrender. At the top of the wall, one name stood larger than the rest. Captain Daniel Carter. Below his name were the words he had spoken before the final battle. "They think they are the predators. They do not understand. We have been at war for 10,000 years. We are the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy." People came from across the planet to see the memorial. They brought flowers and tokens of respect. They stood in silence and remembered what humanity had survived. And somewhere in the galaxy, other species told stories of the humans. The small creatures from a tiny blue planet who had faced extinction and refused to die. The warriors who fought not for conquest but for survival. The people who could be the best friends or the worst enemies anyone had ever known. The Velthari had thought humans were primitive. They had thought humans were weak. They had thought one display of force would make them surrender. They were wrong. Humanity had spent 10,000 years fighting itself. They had perfected the art of war. They had learned to endure anything and survive everything. When the aliens came, they simply turned those skills outward. The Velthari had numbers and technology. Humanity had something more powerful. They had the will to fight, and that made all the difference.